My favorite part of Christmas was definitely the presents. The presents.
Giving a gift to a child does something inside that child.
Christmas was really fun growing up.
Yeah.
My dad made a big deal about it. When we were really, really young, he used to do this thing where he would dress up like Santa Claus. And then he would go around the house shouting, ho, 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 Merry Christmas. And it would be like 5 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't wait to have kids of my own and do Christmas with them, like to have like those kind of memories.
Christmas is a fabulous invention. That's why it's the most popular thing in the world. There's nothing like it. There's no stadium rock tour, World Cup gathering, political event, pilgrimage, riot. Nothing is like Christmas. We spend 10% of our life under the spell of Christmas.
I'm Abraham Lockwood. We met in Illinois. I was fresh out of boot camp, and I met her at the mall. Drug her halfway across the United States and funneled her into Ohio.
I'm Michelle.
And I'm Kate.
I'm the older sister.
So obviously makes me the younger one. Yeah, so people can not keep asking us if we're twins.
Twins,
so
I know.
That'd be great.
We get that all the time.
My name is Angie Mosteller. I came from a home where my parents became Christians when I was a little bit older, about 10. So during those younger years of my life, we really didn't have traditions that incorporated or focused on Jesus or our Christian faith. So as a new mom, I was wanting to just think about how can we build traditions that really build up our children in the faith and an understanding of our history. And that's how I got started on the road to researching Christmas and some of the other holidays.
Last year, I went on a Facebook page, and it's called Wiccan Inspirations. It's a witches page. And one of their mottos was pagans are the reason for the season. And they were saying that Christians were trying to steal their holiday, the winter solstice. And when I went on the page, I was shocked.
Each kind of pre-Christian society had their own way of celebrating this time of year, but most of them did celebrate some type of aspect of the winter solstice.
Modern day pagans try to claim Christmas. They say, we invented Christmas. This is ours. You nicked it from us.
I didn't really consider the origins of Christmas one way or the other. I just kind of took everybody else's word for it, that this is what we should be doing. I was reading in Deuteronomy, I think chapter 12, it was, God was telling the Israelites, don't worship your God the way you see the pagans worship their gods. These things I've commanded you to do, don't add to them or take away from them.
Is it a sin for Christians to celebrate Christmas?
It's a sin for them to celebrate Christmas?
How could there be any harms in celebrating his birthday?
Originally, in Christianity for several centuries, there was no such thing as a feast of Christmas. So nobody knew and nobody celebrated the date of the birth of Jesus Christ. And the question why and from where that originated does obviously interest scholars and Christians as well.
Does the Bible actually tell us to observe Christmas? And the answer is, unfortunately, no.
Paul, for example, never mentions this at all. It's not what he's about.
None of the apostles say, remember the birth of Jesus. So there is this tension here within Christianity that we have to be honest with ourselves and say, well, is Christmas as big a deal as we think it is?
I had heard a lot of rumors about the pagan kind of associations with Christmas. And as I was thinking about how I wanted to bring traditions into my home, I had some concern about, do I want to bring pagan traditions into my home? And so I found that a lot of other new parents, as well as teachers and friends, had these same questions. And I'm a little bit of a researcher by nature, and so I thought, I'm going to just look into some of these claims about the history of Christmas.
That's when I started to question, okay, do we see Christmas anywhere in the Bible? No. So maybe we should go back and rethink the way we're looking.
Winter solstice is really key to what Christmas is. It's the birth of the sun. The days start becoming longer. They're getting shorter and shorter and shorter as you go into wintertime. And then at the winter solstice, the days start becoming longer.
I'm Ronald Hutton, Professor of History at the University of Bristol, England. One of my specialities is the history of seasonal festivals. Stonehenge is probably the most famous prehistoric monument in the world. The greatest of those doorway-like three-stone settings was aligned precisely on the setting sun at midwinter. Now, this is a type of monument you find around Western Europe, all the way from Sweden down to Spain and Corsica and Sardinia. The sun's important in places as different as ancient Egypt, ancient Mesoamerica, like the Mayan civilization, the Toltecs, and also at places like Cuzco. Fixating on the sun is kind of something that most ancient peoples do. And the further north you are, the more important this is.
I think that the celebration of the winter solstice must have begun in connection to the worship of the sun. And we know that people in Scandinavia worship the sun during the Bronze Age. We have found loads and loads of pictures and pictograms and sculptures of the sun. For obvious reasons, we actually almost lose the sun for part of the year.
So Dongzhi is one of the really most important festivals in China. So it's a winter festival. We will have the shortest time of daytime and the longest time of nighttime. So the original holiday traced back all the way like 2,800 years ago, and we say it's almost 3,000 years ago. They will go outside of the palace to worship the heaven.
The practice of Yule goes back pretty far because with Yule, what we're really talking about is the winter solstice.
Yule is quite simply the old Scandinavian, i.e. the Viking name for midwinter. It's the name of their midwinter festival. It's one of the greatest festivals of their year because way up in Scandinavia in the olden times, there wasn't a whole lot you could do around winter. It's exceptionally long and hard up there. And so Yule, getting to its center and knowing that things are going to get better eventually, is the obvious time for a tremendous heathen party.
We have the tradition of the Yule Log. That is definitely a symbol, that fire of the rebirth of the sun. So that's another tradition that does represent that aspect of the winter solstice and the sun being reborn.
It's probably a fertility symbol. In some places, a human figure is chalked on it, called the mock, and some historians say, well, it may be the last remnant of a human sacrifice. But there are some lovely ceremonies attached to it. What you say to the tree when you bring it in. You sprinkle it with grain, which is a sign of fertility, or wine, and say a little prayer over it, and so on.
During Yule celebrations, they would bring in this boar who was called the Sonargalt. It means the boar of atonement. And people would actually swear oaths on the bristles of this boar. And you could also, it's also said that you could make divination from by touching the bristles of this big boar. And it was obviously sacrificed and eaten. This boar was dedicated to the god Freyr.
And then it was like, okay, well, where did all the traditions come from? This is before we even saw the Wiccan page. We decided to start looking into it for ourselves, into scripture, and then we were kind of like, well, where did this stuff come from?
The modern Christmas celebrations tie around Saturnalia, the pagan god Saturn, who, among other things, was eating his children until he was overthrown by his own son.
Now, here I must make the absolutely essential point that Christmas is not a day, it's a season. And it's a very long season. Had you shown up in the Middle Ages in early December, you would have been living in the Christmas period.
The date of the Saturnalia is the 17th of December, but it evolves into a festival that lasts several days, actually, and goes right up until, let's say, the 23rd. And a date in that third week of December, I think must be connected to astronomical knowledge about the timing of the winter solstice. We know about the festival of Saturnalia in Roman pagan times from a number of different authors. So we have Seneca and Macrobius chiefly, and poets like Horace and Martial talk a little bit about it. It shares a lot of elements in common with Christmas, we might think. Gift-giving, feasting, a sense of carnival, a sense of celebration, a focus on light in the middle of the darkness of winter. One of the traditions at Saturnalia was present exchange, which of course is very similar to modern Christmas. So people go around exchanging gifts. Little figurines called sigillaria were popular. These could be quite cheap little pottery things, but there were other sorts of gifts as well. Cloaks and a pencil case and wine and a parasol and a parrot.
Saturn being the god of agriculture, he's also associated with the color red. So that's where we get a lot of that red color, along with holly, which is a symbol of Saturn. You have the red berries.
Can you describe what trees and holly and mistletoe have to do with the Christmas story in the Bible?
You got me on that one. I don't know.
Maybe Mary and Joseph kissed under the mistletoe. I don't know.
I've never heard.
I don't know.
Symbols like holly and mistletoe and greenery in general, they're really just symbolic representations of fertility and vitality at this time of year. So they really just inspire hope that if mistletoe, if holly can grow in the depths of winter, so can I.
Christians fought these Saturnalia celebrations. They were originally prohibited in Christian circles for obvious reasons, because again, they understood where they were coming from. Most infamously would be the mistletoe. Now, modern people think it's a quaint custom to hang a mistletoe, and if you see a pretty girl, give her a kiss under the mistletoe. Well, anyone versed in religious knowledge is going to know that's a fertility ritual, when you're kissing a girl under the mistletoe. Now, the mistletoe not only is beautiful, it's a mysterious thing to traditional peoples. It's actually a parasite. It grows on trees. It doesn't grow in the earth. But to the ancients, that makes it magical. It grows in the sky. That's why the Druids in Celtic tradition, the Druids are a class of priests, would collect the mistletoe. But it gets even stranger. If you crush the berries of the mistletoe, it resembles in texture human semen. That's the tie into fertility. That's why, again, in distorted form, people are kissing girls under the mistletoe. In fact, it's kind of an obscene rite saying we want to have sexual intercourse with you.
Mistletoe really is quite rare as a plant. And so it becomes fashionable really in richer, more sophisticated times like the 17th, 18th century. And nobody kisses under it until round about the time of George Washington. It's the late 18th century in London that produces the custom, first for servants in big houses, and then their mistresses and masters, rather sportingly, instead of discouraging the practice, imitate it.
The pagans would practice what's called the world upside down. During this period, teachers would follow orders from students. The students would give them assignments. During this period, masters would serve slaves at the table, and slaves would provide, well, give them orders.
So you have the Feast of Fools. This is often connected to street parades, finding the local village idiot and parading him around as king.
Now's the time we crown the king of fools!
Wild carryings on. But Cowans was really a bigger festival than Saturnalia. It was the New Year festival, with all that may imply, the notion of sort of reconstituting everything, the world being born again.
The Romans would celebrate the Calendae on the 1st of January, which is where we have New Year's Day to this very moment. So that kind of shiver most people get as the clock ticks towards midnight on the 31st of December is really old.
The notion that gifts given on New Year's are Christmas gifts is an idea that exists even today in France, where they're more likely to hand out gifts on New Year's.
Before the 1800s, you do not get presents at Christmas. You get partying and feasting. The presents get given on New Year's Day.
When Christians think about the pagan tie-ins, what they're wrestling with is the purity of the faith, right? They're saying, is this really a good thing?
Melissa and I get a lot of letters from people who are newly out of the New Age, which is paganism, and they don't want to be deceived, so they get hyper vigilant about anything that smacks of paganism. So we get a lot of letters from people who are afraid that it's that the Roman Catholic Church appropriated pagan holidays of the winter solstice and put a Christian veneer over it to make it palatable to new Christians, for pagans leaving paganism to come and become Christians.
Right, so the winter solstice is what date?
The 21st.
21st, yeah.
21st, 22nd. So since the solstice is the 22nd, that's the day where the sun stands still for those 2 days. The 25th is a different date.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So if they were wanting to expropriate the winter solstice, they would have made Jesus born on December 22nd.
True.
That's true.
Caesar, Julius Caesar, the famous one, in his calendar reform of 45-44, established the winter solstice as on the 25th of December, okay? And he said that's Boomer, and Boomer means the midwinter.
Everybody knows that the winter solstice is on the 21st of December, but that is actually not the original idea of Julius Caesar, who was the originator, the inventor of our calendar, so to speak. He fixed the date on the 25th of December, so that would be the older Julian date for the solstice, but that calendar is not entirely precise. So basically, roughly speaking, 1 day per century it shifts. So by the 4th century, when Christmas originated, the date from the 25th had shifted to the 21st, and that's the day that has been later instituted by Pope Gregory XIII in the 16th century to be the standard winter solstice, which is valid until today, and that's what our calendar still says. The winter solstice has nothing whatsoever to do with Christmas, because the Bible simply doesn't speak about any form of solstice, shortest day, the sun or whatever. It just speaks about the birth of a child in a manger. But Christmas preserves the older Julian date for winter solstice, that is the 25th of December.
We don't know when Jesus was born. We don't know when Jesus was born. We don't know when Jesus was born. The gospel stories don't tell us. They give us some clues that we think it was probably generally in the autumn season, but we really don't know.
No one knows when the date was. 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 But almost all the evidence is sometime late September, early October.
And the answer is no, no one knows.
So why are we celebrating it on the 25th?
By about 200, there's a calendar of Antiochus, which says the 25th of December is the birthday of Helios, of the sun. So there is definitely an idea of birthday already by 200 AD.
Probably the first usage of the date 25th December for a big festive occasion is in the early 270s AD or CE, when a Roman emperor called Aurelian dedicates a huge temple at Rome to the unconquered sun, Sol Invictus. Aurelian's a military hard guy who's pulled the empire back together after decades of invasion and civil war, and he's trying to produce a religion around which all the pagans of the empire can unite, and the sun up there in the sky giving warmth and life to the world could be this symbol. And so he dedicates this big temple at Rome to the sun on the 25th of December.
One of the theories now is that Aurelian actually chose December 25th to co-opt a popular Christmas date, that Christmas had already been enough of a whoop for an emperor who wanted to emphasize the sun god and victory, to steal it as a date.
It is my view, and I think it's the view of the majority of scholars of this period, that Aurelian did dedicate his temple on the 25th of December 274.
Unfortunately, there's no direct evidence for the date of that inauguration. It will have been inaugurated sometime, and it is probably a plausible hypothesis to think that it was the 25th of December. It's a good option, it's a good guess, but there's no hard evidence for that date.
It is still very controversial as to what's going on about the choice of the 25th of December as being an important day for Sol Invictus.
Now, the important thing to bear in mind here is that quite independently of Sol Invictus, December 25th was already widely regarded to be the date of the winter solstice. And this date had already a certain degree of solar symbolism built into it, because obviously this date marks the transition from decreasing daylight length to increasing daylight length. And as a result, it made a lot of sense on a symbolic level to argue that the sun is born on this date, and as the sun grows older, the days grow longer.
We then come to the slightly more controversial problem of, well, then how do you understand that same date being adopted as the birthday of Christ?
354 is the first year in which Christ gets officially given a birthday on the 25th of December.
The Roman Empire has become Christian. Okay, so Constantine.
I can't think of anything where the word Christmas ever comes up.
in the reign of Constantine. But because of that December the 25th, and because that was the feast day for the god Sol Invictus, it eventually becomes a convenient day for Christians to celebrate the birth of Christ. The first record we have of this happening is in a surviving calendar from the year 354.
It's called the Philocalian calendar, and it's a bizarre, it's kind of like an almanac. It's got all kinds of pictures and dates and distances of one city to another.
It says this is the day of Sol Invictus, and it's also the day on which Christians celebrate the birth of Christ. It was prepared for a Christian, and yet it had all the pagan holidays in it, and all the things that Christians were supposed to despise.
The need for Christmas was felt in the 4th century and not before that, because the general religious culture changed. And the growing interest in the sun is certainly part of that new religious culture in the 4th century, in late antiquity, and without that growing interest in the sun, probably Christmas would not have originated, or if it originated, it would probably not have fallen on the 25th of December.
And this solar symbolism could be in principle also applied to Jesus, because in early Christian sources, Jesus is sometimes being given as solar attributes. He's referred to as the Son of Justice, as Christ the true Sun.
You sometimes get representations of Christ with rays. You sometimes do get a nimbus, meaning a golden zone around the head of Christ and later of other saints as well. You do get, for example, in the apse of Santa Pollinare in Classe in Ravenna, a sun rising above the horizon, which is Christ, recognizable because there's a cross in that sun, and it also says that it is Christ.
If Christ is majesty, and Christ is also justice, there are two reasons for assimilating him to the sun. And if the birthday of the sun is the 25th, it's perfectly possible to make this the date of his birth.
You're unlikely to come on the basis of the information given in the Bible to the 25th of December. But once it was installed, then it was relatively easy to find theories covering that date too. And you could even go further and say, if you take the Gospel Luke 2 seriously, it is unlikely that it happened in winter, because the shepherds were out in the fields, and even in Palestine, where it's warmer than in Middle Europe or Northern Europe, even in Palestine, at the end of December, shepherds would not normally be out on the fields with their sheep during night.
The church had a really good marketing strategy. They were great marketers. So any culture they went to, they would incorporate what those people cared about most into Christianity. And that's part of the reason why there are so many variations of Christianity too, in part because each culture around the world is going to care and value different things and have different celebrations, and Christianity took those and incorporated that as a way to help inspire that conversion process.
It took 400 or 500 years to get to all of Europe. The last part of Europe that it went to was Scandinavia. And always when the Christian church went somewhere, they had to negotiate with local political rulers. And so Christmas came to different parts of Europe at different times, but the Catholic Church always found it convenient to fold local custom into their own church.
Håkon the Good, he had a plan of converting Norway to Christianity, but in a sort of soft way. So he began with the Christmas celebration. Now, they didn't celebrate Christmas, obviously, because they were pagan, but they did celebrate Yule, and they had this big celebration of Yule around the 12th of January. So Håkon the Good, he changed the date and said he demanded that they start to celebrate on the 25th of December. So instead of celebrating the first sightings of the sun in the north, they were supposed to celebrate the birth of Christ, obviously. And people accepted the change of date. That's okay. So as long as they got a party, they were fine with that.
Rulers made the decision to become Christians. It's kind of funny, you know, a prince or a duke would make a decision for the whole kingdom to say, okay, you'll now all believe this. But you have to do things, even when you're an authoritarian ruler, you have to do things to make the people accept it. So it just was easier to do that, to celebrate these old pagan holidays.
Some people in the church that we were going to started to say things like, okay, well, you know, the roots of Christmas is pagan. We were like, we don't care, okay? We don't care where it came from. The point is that we're celebrating Christ, we're celebrating his birth. I don't care what those people were doing.
I had little sneaking suspicions that it had pagan roots. But it's not until we started really getting into it and doing a little bit of research that I really felt uncomfortable with it. But I didn't say anything because I thought that the rest of the family would not only have a problem with it, but I didn't want to be the black sheep and be like, oh, well.
As a child, not coming from a Christian home, I had a lot of just common questions. I mean, what does St. Nicholas have to do with the birth of Christ?
St. Nicholas was, though we've mostly forgotten him, the greatest male saint for 1,000 years. He was almost as powerful and as venerated as the Virgin Mary. Hundreds of churches around the world are St. Nicholas churches. Hundreds of churches around the world are St. Nicholas churches. Hundreds of churches around the world are St. Nicholas churches. The first church in North America is a St. Nicholas church. He is the patron saint of just about everything.
Now, aren't there legends about St. Nicholas?
Yes, this is the one that really makes the headlines. So here's the story. 3 students, so probably they're young men, not kids, but they're always presented as kids. They're going off to study and they stop at this inn where the innkeeper has this nasty habit of killing his guests, chopping them up and pickling them in barrels in the basement and then serving the meat in meat pies. So he kills the kids, chops them up, puts them in the barrel. And St. Nicholas comes visiting a few days later and spidey senses are tingling. There's something going on here. And he says, you've got 3 kids in the basement chopped up. Confess. Yes, yes. So he goes down to the basement and resurrects the children. They are reassembled, and so you very often see 3 kids coming out of a tub. He is the patron saint of barrel makers, pickle makers, innkeepers. The innkeeper turned good, by the way, and students and kids.
And there was a custom that this character would come door to door on Christmas time. And he would knock on the door, he'd be in disguise and say, was little Johann a good boy? And if the mother said yes, he'd give him some candy.
Krampus is an assistant of St. Nicholas. The 2 of them will go door to door, and Nicholas's job is to check in with the children and ask other parents how they've been doing that year. And the Krampus's job is to punish them if they've been bad. This is actually a tradition that's acted out in certain towns in Austria and Bavaria. It's pretty rare now in this form where they go house to house, but where that happens, Nicholas will, as I said, talk to the kids. There's a little traditional rhyme that he says when he enters, and he does give them little small gifts. He's costumed as like a medieval bishop. And this is how the Krampuses were originally. You just take an old coat, turn it inside out so you see the fur, and my Austrian friend said that his grandfather would take a rug off the floor. And so it was just like, how do you disguise yourself and make yourself look like something other?
So it's always a fur-clad, smutty-faced, glowering character. Might carry chains or a whip.
This Krampus is often shown with the chains, and these chains are held by St. Nicholas, who's the Santa Claus. And they say that this might symbolize how Santa Claus, like as a Christian figure, was able to chain and control these pagan elements.
At the time, as opposed to modern day Santa, who is in charge of both giving gifts and keeping track of who's naughty, those responsibilities were split between the two. So St. Nicholas would give out treats, small toys, things like that, and Krampus would be the one who would be used by parents to threaten their kids. If you're bad, Krampus is going to come and take you away.
You know, these masking traditions can go back to the 1100s or so, or even older, to the Roman Empire.
When we first heard about the pagan roots, is they were saying like the Christmas tree was pagan, and that is something that we shouldn't be doing. But we were like, well, we're celebrating the birth of Christ.
Maybe they're worshiping the tree, but we're not.
We're not worshiping the tree. We're not carving it into an idol. We're just cutting down a tree and bringing it into our house. And so we're like, okay, well, where did this Christmas tree thing come from?
The earliest evidence we have of evergreens being brought into the houses is early folklore. It's from the Middle Ages. We just know that people have been taking evergreen branches, for example, of evergreens, mistletoe, juniper, holly, or other pine tree branches into the houses during. It has been important to put it into the houses as a way of protection, warding off evil, and as a symbol of life, basically, during this time of death and darkness.
But the first notion of an evergreen tree-like object comes from the late 1400s. It's a pole stuck up outside, decorated with evergreen branches. And we know of one, at least one in London, and two in the Baltic area, Estonia and Latvia, where German merchants had set up trading posts. Now, as to who is the first, it's a heated topic in Estonia and Latvia.
The story of the Christmas tree is documented in the Brotherhood of Blackheads Chronicles from the year 1509-1510, written in the Old German language. According to the chronicles, logs were burned during the winter solstice in pagan traditions, and it's likely that the first Christmas tree was originally meant to be set on fire at Town Hall Square in Riga.
Riga claims to have put up the first ever Christmas tree in this very town square right here in the year 1510, it says on the ground. This is obviously a big tourist attraction because, you know, Christmas trees are European-wide tradition, everyone knows about them. Lots of tourists have come along and taken their photo with this. The only issue is that Estonia, where I've just come from, also claims to have put up the first Christmas tree in 1441 in Tallinn Town Square by the Brotherhood of Blackheads Merchant Association.
In the 1500s, say, half a century or so later, people are moving the trees inside. This happens in Germany. They will go out into the forest and lop the top off an evergreen tree. They'll bring it inside and they'll hang it upside down from the ceiling. By the late 1500s, people start cutting down the whole tree and bringing it inside and setting it, we would say, right side up.
It becomes a great fashion across Germany in the 17th, 18th centuries, and German refugees fleeing from Napoleon bring it to England the 1790s, 1800s. And it becomes an English fashion, largely because of one very influential German. He's Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, who introduces it to the royal family in the 1840s. And that's when it becomes a pretty well universal tradition.
But what I think is interesting is that when this Yule tree tradition came or returned from the south, then lots of Christians were upset about it because they thought it was a pagan tradition.
Trees, especially evergreen trees, are very important in ancient symbolism. A lot of northern pagan peoples have the idea of one enormous tree that connects all the levels of the world, from the top of the sky through to the underworld.
In scientific thought, we always ignore the irregular, the exception to the rule. In magical thought, it's the reverse. The ordinary doesn't attract attention, the unusual does. So because the tree remains green when all other trees are dead, this gives special significance to the evergreen tree. What's ever unusual is magical and powerful. Presbyterians don't realize today that the Reformed churches in the Reformation suppressed Christmas celebrations as well because they understood it was pagan.
If we're saying that we're celebrating his birth, then why is everything that we're doing all about us and our family and
what we want to do?
What we want to do?
A perfect theological solution. God brings us everything good, so why not say to the children, the baby Jesus, the Christ child, das Christkindl, le petit Jésus, has brought you this.
So having Santa bring gifts and having the Christ child bring gifts is like, that's a big issue. People will have stickers, in really traditional areas, they'll have stickers in their windows with a slash through Santa Claus or the Christmas man saying, no Weihnachtsmann here.
And the ironic thing is, you know, I think it was in Germany they came up with the Kris Kringle term, which means Christ child, because they were trying to kind of turn the focus back to Jesus to say, he's the real giver of gifts, and our greatest gift was his own life, giving himself. But it's ironic because I always thought that term meant, I thought it was synonymous with St. Nicholas, but it actually means Christ child.
Christmas goes into a decline in England and the English-speaking world after King Charles II comes back to power in 1660 and the Puritans are booted out. People have lost the taste for Christmas in that period, or at least to say the upper class seems to have lost its taste for Christmas. Christmas becomes associated with peasants, the lower classes, the countryside. Over the next 150 years, by 1800, both in England and in American colonies, particularly in northeastern America, Christmas has turned into an outdoor New Year's Eve bash. It's associated with adults, alcohol, making a nuisance of yourself, jostling prosperous citizens off the sidewalk, burning down churches belonging to African Americans, beating up immigrants, all the kind of stuff you like to do if you're a thug on New Year's Eve. So that's what Christmas is associated with. You look at some of the illustrations in England at that time period, and does not seem to be a time of religion or generosity.
Why was Christmas once illegal in America?
Dang.
You could even be fined for celebrating it.
Oh, wow. I have no idea. Would it have been, so I don't know what Christmas was like before like the 1900s. So I'm not really like, would that have been just, would that have to do with the paganism, or would that have to do with maybe the something? I don't know. Well, could you tell me?
In northeastern United States, it was outlawed. The states settled by the Puritans, like Connecticut, Massachusetts, didn't like Christmas, didn't want to have anything to do with it. And apparently, it was right until the 1870s that Christmas Day was a school day, a work day.
Yeah, well, the Puritans were real killjoys.
Yeah, they were much fun.
If you go to the American Antiquarian Society, there'll be sermons against the evils of Christmas. The colony records of Massachusetts and the colony records of Connecticut, you can find the laws right there. They thought Christmas was an immoral holiday.
If you were in America, in Boston in 1810, Christmas was ignored. Boston was overwhelmingly Protestant, and it was just a normal day.
From the mid-1640s to 1660, Christmas is officially outlawed. Businesses had to be open on Christmas. If you shut down on Christmas, you were in trouble. The Sheriff of London would go around and pull down greenery that he saw on the streets. Christmas services were broken up by the police, people thrown in jail. So Christmas carols were silent, Christmas services silent, Christmas festivities were silent for those periods. And it becomes a social problem in both England and northeastern United States.
I think the first time it crossed my mind that there was something wrong was maybe when I was about 5. If we're celebrating Christ's birth, if it's his birthday party, why is Santa in the foreground?
Santa Claus, who the heck is Santa Claus? Santa Claus is a bastardization of the Dutch Sinterklaas, Saint Nicholas. So we can tell that folk memory has preserved it because there is it's only oral. So we have Sandy Claw, Sandy Claus, Sinterklaas, Santa Claus, all one word.
This will sound rather unusual, but in fact, Santa Claus is really just a grossly distorted version of the pagan god Odin. He is the only Norse god routinely depicted as old.
There was still that connection where people were making between paganism, Yule and Christmas, so that might be part of it, is making Saint Nick kind of look like Odin a little bit. But do keep in mind that's just a theory, so.
Saint Nicholas walks or rides a white horse in most parts of Europe.
And the 8 flying reindeer? Those probably had their roots in Odin's flying 8-legged horse.
Now this is pagan, where they would celebrate Odin coming down on his horse, and they would put little shoes out with food in it for the horse, and Odin as a thanks would put candy or some kind of treats in that shoe and replace the hay or whatever they had put there for the horse.
Sometime around 1200, some Catholic nuns in an orphanage put a little gift in the shoes of their children that they're caring for on the eve of St. Nicholas Day. So the evening of December 5th. And kids wake up and there's something lovely and they say, St. Nicholas brought that. Well, it just seems like such a great idea. It spreads all across Europe. The real magic happens in a poem that appears in 1821 called A Children's Friend. This is a poem about the arrival on Christmas Eve of a figure called Santa Claus. And he's not wearing a bishop's outfit, he's wearing a long robe trimmed in fur. Nobody knows who wrote this, but this is a guy who started a revolution. The next year, one of these New York aristocrats that wants to domesticate Christmas tells to his family the poem that we know is The Night Before Christmas. And he's obviously read A Children's Friend because he comes down the chimney, clothed all in fur, except this time he's not a full-sized adult, he is some dwarfish figure. Small enough to fit down a chimney.
Now Santa Claus enters the house through the chimney and leaves that way, and people miss the significance. In traditional lore, the sorcerer, the witch, the demon does not enter by the door. Your friend, an ordinary safe person, comes by the door. The thief enters by the window. Witches, sorcerers, demons enter through the chimney. And this old Santa Claus version, again, is a demonized version of Odin. He climbs down the chimney.
In this poem, there's no long black birchen rod. There's no horse manure in the stocking. There's no switches. This is a guy of whom you don't have to be afraid. So this notion of a grandfatherly, magical gift bringer who comes on December 24th in a reindeer-powered sleigh goes viral.
The crowd yelled, "There's the Elmos," and they rushed us.
I think there comes a point where the roots are so far gone that the present meaning doesn't carry the pagan connotation anymore.
I tend to follow more of a Wiccan-based paganism, but there are many different forms and types of paganism.
I personally celebrate Yule on the 23rd of December usually, just to kind of carry it on a little bit to join in with my family's festivities.
So we'll start with the gold candle and we'll turn towards the east. Grandmother,
I find it amusing when people say, put Christ back in Christmas, because if you are Christian and you really do want to follow, the teachings of Jesus, then yeah, it probably doesn't make much sense to have all of these kind of, pagan things that represent fertility, because that's not really about the birth of Jesus.
Some people say it's not likely that the Christians would have wanted to take a pagan festival and make it Christian. On the other hand, they do appear to have done so. So I think one needs to find some other way of explaining what's going on.
So if you go to the Vatican today, you'll be surprised to find full mosaics from pagan temples just in the church.
In the middle of the square is this giant obelisk there. That's not even a Roman thing, that's an Egyptian solar deity monument. It's created by the Egyptians to honor their sun god Ra.
There was a temple to Minerva. That later got converted into a church. And its modern name, the name of the church is Santa Maria Sopra Minerva, which means on top of Minerva.
The early Christians took on from paganism the shape of their churches, decorations like statues and hangings and altars and cloths, and a great many festivals, especially to those connected to obvious turning points of the year like midwinter and midsummer.
I tend to celebrate the 8 holidays most commonly associated with Wicca, and those are all based around the movement of the sun and the seasons. So the winter solstice Yule, or the summer solstice Litha, and then the 2 equinoxes where day and night are equal. And in the fall, the autumnal equinox would be Mabon, the vernal equinox would be Ostara. And then you have 4 points in between. So that's how you make the 8 holidays, which are all about recognizing those changes in the seasons.
Outside Christmas, there are plenty of synchronizations of pagan with later Christian festivals. May Day becomes the feast of the apostles, Philip and James. Midsummer becomes the feast of John the Baptist. What we now call Halloween, the great pagan festival that opened winter, becomes the feast of All Saints and All Souls, and so you go on round the year.
Is it a sin to celebrate Christmas?
I don't think so, no. It's a joyous celebration. I mean, you're celebrating The birth of Jesus? No, but I don't know why. I mean, I don't know.
Is it a sin to celebrate Christmas?
So what Christianity has done over the centuries is to take stuff from the surroundings and tame it, Christianize it. So we don't have human sacrifices anymore. We consider that bad manners, but we have the Yule Log. You know, we don't do druidic stuff, but we have the mistletoe. You know, we're not dancing naked in the streets, but we are giving little presents, like at Callan's, to kids.
For people that want to just, say that it doesn't come from pagan origins, my opinion on that is, well, you're just turning a blind eye to what history has told us. I mean, these trends, these stories, this is the scholarly work that has been done. I like to look at Robert Weber, whose Institute of Christian Worship series is pretty much my go-to source. I mean, he documents these origins. It's there. Secular historians document these things. When we deny that these origins exist, we actually do disservice to Christianity's, and what I would actually say or argue, we do disservice to Christian intellect. And then we end up just coming across as these sort of dumb fundamentalists, and that's not helpful.
This is an important point. 19th century scholars discovered that rituals outlive beliefs. So what happens is the ritual continues, but we forget why we're doing it. And then we invent an explanation. And the 19th century scholars called this myth, to explain why we're doing something. You could also call it a rationalization.
What we've both come to realize is that Christmas is something where you're literally saying that this is for me and I'm worshiping you, I'm celebrating you in this way. I'm not celebrating him by saying today's Friday. You know what I mean? Right? So it's like, I think it makes a big difference when you're actually doing something for him. Exactly.
What really is the bottom line for me is Deuteronomy chapter 12, not worshiping God the way we see other people worship their gods.
The way the pagans do.
That in itself is enough to not celebrate Christmas, knowing that Christmas is not in the Bible and taking that scripture.
I would ask, where in scripture do we find that, the Father redeemed anything from a pagan god's worship and redeemed it for himself? I don't see that anywhere in scripture.
I would say it's really worth the risk if the date itself, December 25, was chosen because of some proximity to some kind of pagan festival. Let's just take it and sanctify and make the most of it, because Christ is worthy to be celebrated in his birth.
So each time that you are presented with an image, imagine that the logo and branding are being proposed for use on your church. So if you're ready, let's begin. So this one is the triple goddess. The moon is the symbol of the goddess and its three phases: waxing, full, and waning.
This leaves me waning. If you're being redeemed from something, you don't bring it with you. Okay? I can change, but I shouldn't be still drinking, carousing, and doing all that stuff. Bringing the symbol of what it was with you, and then having to say, oh, but it's been redefined, I think misses the point.
But the scriptures are very clear that we're not supposed to be mixing the holy with the unholy, right? And so just because something is tradition does not mean that it's right. There's a lot of things that are tradition.
What the different prophets were told to do with the symbols of Baal or Dagon or any of the other gods they ran into, they were to burn them, destroy them, not incorporate them. And that, I think, would be the foundation I would use. Even though that's an Old Testament example, I still believe that it's more true.
If we're going to take that legalistic approach to Christmas, then we're going to have to rethink a whole lot of things. And my personal opinion is I reject that interpretation that says because Deuteronomy said this, we shouldn't do that. Deuteronomy says a lot of things. So am I moderate? Am I, bordering on the edge of heresy? You be the judge.
I think everything should be tested, and every person needs to test everything that they see. And the Word of God is the best way to test everything that you see. Instead of observing Christmas, we've switched to observing the feast days. Sukkot, Passover.
When I started to study more about the biblical feasts, I started to wonder why Christians are not observing them, and when these are things that actually point back to him being, the Passover lamb.
Exactly. That points to him being the ultimate sacrificial lamb. What does Christmas tree and Carolyn have anything to do with him?
It's hard to be gentle and telling your kids the way you think that you should be doing things without saying and not having an explanation as to why your friends and family don't do the same thing. We don't want them to make them look bad at all. So, I think usually the only explanation is, well, we don't believe all the same things they do, and it just kind of, just kind of leave it at that, I guess.
It's a pagan ceremony through and through. There's absolutely nothing to do with the birth of Christ regarding Christmas. I know it sounds alarming.
You can have it both ways in deciding how pagan Christmas actually should be or can be viewed as being. On the one hand, it definitely was a time of year sacred to pagans all over Europe. On the other hand, the symbolism of the return of the sun and the birth of the Son of God is fairly self-evident too. And so you can, if you like, have a Christian concept of Christmas.
Well, as a historian, you must say, if you want to get rid of all Christian traditions that are not strictly speaking attested in the Bible, then you have to get rid of many, many things. Christianity has grown over centuries, and the whole package, what it means to be a Christian today, is shaped certainly by biblical traditions, but also by many other elements. So you would really, in terms of Christian feasts, you would have to get rid of many, many things, not just Christmas and liturgy and so on. That is one thing. The other thing is that I think it is important to bear in mind that Christmas is not attested in the Bible.
Well, sin is transgression against the law. And in his law, the Father does tell us do not worship me the way the pagans worship their God. Where we worship him as the way pagans worship their God when we were involved in the Christmas traditions.
We were doing all the same traditions.
The same traditions at the same time, too.
At the same time.
Yeah.
And we were saying that we were doing it for him.
Yeah, we saw it as our part of our Christian religion in a sense. So that was we were worshiping him.
We were thinking in order to be a Christian that how could we not celebrate his birth?
Yeah.
So it was a form of worship.
It was a form of worship. So
based on that criteria,
then I think we were sinning. I think we were in sin, obviously unknowingly, clearly.
So yeah, I would say that celebrating Christmas could definitely be
a sin.
Does it matter?
I think it does. You know why? Because you see, the reason why I think that even if someone could say, okay, prove to me that celebrating Christmas is not a sin, I think it still matters, because that is almost like me saying to my husband that as long as I don't commit adultery against you, that there's no reason for you to divorce me. What kind of a marriage would that be? Don't I want to make him happy? Do I want to do what pleases him?
It's way bigger than whether it's a sin. It's a sad place that's where the discussion goes.
Yeah.
Oh well, it's not a sin, so I can do it. Oh well, it's not gonna cause my salvation. So therefore I can do it. It's like, where have we come? How did we get to this point that we just want to do the bare minimum? We say that it's all about him. We sing the songs that, oh, I give myself away, I give myself away. But then we'll give ourselves into a certain limit. Oh, I'm not giving away my Christmas. I'm not giving away those traditions because it's not a sin. And I'm not going to lose my salvation. So, no, I'm not letting go of that. Then are you giving yourself away?
Of course he still loves you. What about loving him? You know what I mean? And honestly, thinking about it just breaks my heart. Like, what about loving him?